ready? Right.
Ladies
So,
and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us tonight for the second session. As you can see, it's entitled, How Do We Know the Torah Genuinely Came from God at Sinai? We had tremendous feedback last week from Rabbi Hassan, so thank you very much for coming again, and please enjoy Rabbi Hassan tonight.
thank you. Right, so last week we discussed how each one of us can find out for himself or herself that there is a creator. And that was a system used by Avraham Avinu, examining the world, design or accident. It can't all be accidents, it has to be design. And if there are accidents, how many accidents can you put together and still believe it's an accident? So we all seem to have agreed on that. Okay, now we go to the next stage. The next stage is we don't work it out ourselves, but God tells us. And how do we know He told us? Okay? How do we know the Torah genuinely came from God at Sinai? Okay, I had a dream last night. God came to me and said, Avraham, Avraham, ever heard those words? And I said, yeah, God, here I am. And He says, you're going to speak in shrubs tomorrow night. And I said, yeah, God, you know it all. Well, tell them all that each one has to give you £1,000. There's a message from God. Does anybody believe me? Will you give me £1,000? No. So you don't believe me? Anybody believe me? No, of course not. Okay. Imagine I say to you that God said to me, they're not going to believe you. They just don't have any faith. I'll tell you what. Tell them that God said to you that you have to give each one of them £1,000. Now wait a minute before you answer. I didn't say, will you take the £1,000? I said, did you believe me? Will you believe me that God said to me, I've got to give you £1,000? No. Why not? What does common sense say if somebody says, God spoke to me? What's a common sense response? Goodbye, get out, get lost. Okay. We can't believe people who say, God spoke to me. The curious incident in the Gemara, in the days when the Jews were exiled to Babylon, the king was Nebuchadnezzar, a wicked, evil, powerful monarch, and we suffered a lot through him. And Jeremiah kept on saying, don't go against him, it's only political, let him rule. But the governing party, the army in Israel wouldn't agree, and in the end the temple was destroyed. So the Jews were taken into exile in Babylon, and at one stage, now the Babylonians knew the Jews had prophets. So one man went to the palace, asked to speak to the princess, and said, I've got a message from God, I'm a prophet, God said to me that you have to consort with my friend Mr. A. And he left it at that. The next day, Mr. A comes along and says to the princess, God spoke to me, you have to consort with Mr. B. Now, the young woman was not particularly chaste, but she wasn't a fool. So she went to her father and said, these two Jews came and told me they're prophets and I've got to do X, Y, Z. So he said, the prophets I've spoken to have all told me that God hates immorality. This doesn't sound right. Bring them in. So they called in these two so-called prophets, and are you prophet? Yes. Okay. Well, I had 3 prophets a short while ago, Hananiah, Michael, Azariah, if you've heard of them, and I threw them into a furnace, and they came out alive. So I throw you into a furnace. If you come out alive, you're a prophet. If not, you're not. Now they're in a quandary. So they said, yeah, but they were 3 and we are 2. No problem. Choose yourself a 3rd great Jew, and I'll throw 3 of you in, and we'll see if you're prophets or not. So they chose the greatest they knew, Yehoshua Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who was also exiled, and the 3 were thrown into a furnace. The Kohen Gadol came out singed in his clothes, but alive, and the other 2 just disappeared. In other words, anybody can stop and think, when a so-called prophet comes with a message, don't believe them. Okay, let's look at the history of some world religions. How do religions start? Let's take 3 prominent ones. Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and what's the history there? They all have one common denominator. which is, they were all started by one man who claimed a divine revelation. All three of them. Gautama Buddha, Jesus of Nazareth, Muhammad, each one claimed to have a revelation. Did anybody share their revelation with them? They did not even claim that. Each one said, I had a revelation. Buddha, he put himself into a trance under a tree. He had magnificent revelations. He saw the truth and he started teaching everybody. There was no one there with him. So how do we know these are genuine revelations or just nice things which he thought about? So he's considered an extraordinary being. He's not a god. The word Buddha means enlightened. But how do we know that he did have a divine revelation? He's not a god. So I can show you a picture of him, so-called. He's not a god. The next one, Jesus. He claimed to be the Son of God. It was claimed about him he's the Son of God. It was claimed he was born via a virgin conception. Who could know that Mary was a virgin? Other than? Mary. Can she prove it? No. Who could know God spoke to Jesus and told him to say the things he said? Only he. It's a one-person claim. The Gospels claim he was resurrected after he died. How do they know? The tomb was empty. Therefore, he must have been resurrected. Did anybody see the resurrection? No. They saw an empty tomb. He was seen by the apostles after the resurrection. Oh, now we have a few people seeing him after the resurrection. There's a problem. There's two Gospels which speak about it. One says he was, they're contradictory. One says he was only seen in the Galilee, nowhere else. The other one said, only seen in Jerusalem, nowhere else. So they contradict themselves. So there's more than one man there, but they contradict themselves. So again, the Gospels claim he fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread. By the way, a lot of these claims are to imitate Eliyahu, Elisha. So Elisha did feed lots of people. They say Jesus did it. Not one of them has been identified. Nobody could get any confirmation. All these stories without confirmation. So the claims of Christianity are all unprovable. And on top of it, you have Paul. Most of the books of the Gospels are written by Paul. He only experienced a revelation of Jesus 30 years after the guy was dead. One man, 30 years later. Who's going to believe Paul that he had a vision? And no, he can't prove anything. So all these are one-person claims. So we have plenty of reasons to reject Jesus. Plenty. Apart from all this, the point I want to make is it's one-man claim. Either Jesus said God spoke to him, or Paul said he had a vision. One man claims. Muhammad of Mecca, same story. God spoke to him, an angel spoke to him. Islam does not claim anybody was there with Muhammad to verify the claim. No one was there to share the revelation. One man claim. Later, Muhammad shared his experiences. This is supposed to be one of his swords here. Why do I show you his sword? Because he was greatly assisted by the sword, because people would rather keep their heads on the shoulders than disagree with Muhammad. But if you're not being threatened with a sword, you can say to him, prove it. I can't believe God spoke to you. So what's a common sense answer to anybody who says God spoke to me? And the Navy will say, tell it to the Marines, if you've heard the expression. Okay, so now us. How do we know the Torah genuinely came from Hashem at Sinai? What's our claim? Did one man, Moshe, tell us? No. What's our claim? Okay, now you've got to start thinking. Bashing the opposition is entertainment. Establishing our point is thinking. The Torah says, ask now regarding the early days that were before you, since the day that God created man upon the earth, from one end of the heavens to the other end of the heavens, whether there was anything like this great thing, or was the likes of it ever heard. Whenever you are in history, have you ever heard of the following claim? Does any religion make this claim which we are making? Did ever a people hear God's voice speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard and lived. A people. All the people heard God speak. Have you ever heard anywhere about the prophetic experience shared by so many people? So here's a big, big difference. Everybody else is a one man, one woman, one man claim. This is a nation, a national claim. At Sinai, we were all there. So from the very beginning, the Torah threw out a challenge and told us, no one will ever make such a claim, that the whole nation heard God speak to them. It's not going to happen. We have to find out why not. But the Torah says it's never going to happen. All the other religions claim a revelation to one person. We claim a revelation to a whole nation, 100% of the nation. We all shared the experience, and we could all confirm with each other, I saw you there, you saw me there, we were all there, everybody together. Moshe Rabbeinu was a leader, but he wasn't the only one. We were all there together with him. We shared the experience with Moshe Rabbeinu. Not only the revelation at Sinai, has any God, small g, performed miracles to come and take him a nation from the midst of another nation with trials, with signs, with wonders, all the 10 plagues, with war, the Red Sea, with a strong hand, with an outstretched arm, with great awesome deeds, as all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt, before your eyes. All of you saw what was happening in Egypt. Is there any comparable public demonstration ever in history? That's what the Torah is saying. Nobody will ever claim that the nation heard God, and nobody has a story of national experience of this sort. You've been shown in order to know that the Lord is God, there is none else beside him. So yes, we can't work out that there has to be a creator. But God wanted more than that. He wanted to show us clearly, black on white, without any room for any doubt whatsoever, that there's none else other than Hashem, that there is a creator. So the Torah has shown us the difference between us and everybody else. In our case, Hashem showed us all his presence. He knew it would not be enough to leave history for people to find out for themselves by working out, like Avraham Avinu worked out. There has to be design and work it out for yourself. He wanted to bring a hammer blow. You make it clear to the whole nation there is a God and he is speaking to us. So the Exodus of Sinai story happened in the presence of the whole nation. Now what was the size of the nation? 600,000 couples. That's 1,200,000 adults. Add the children under 20. Take a guess how many kids per family. So were there 3 million people? Were there 4 million people? So we're not talking the claim of one man. We are talking of a claim of a whole nation having heard God. And the whole nation knew that God was talking at Sinai. And the whole nation knew that the salvation from Egypt was extraordinary and saw all the miracles. We all saw it. So, just by the way, do not underestimate the power. Don't underestimate the power of the meals you cook on Pesach for the Seder. Yeah? I'll just finish this phrase. Yeah. Don't underestimate the power that we meet once a year, family gets together, and we tell the story over year after year after year. Most of us have had a Seder with the grandparents, and most of our grandparents had a Seder with their grandparents. This has been going on throughout the generations. Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused. If, when you say that, who are you saying witness, the people witnessing?
The whole Jewish nation.
Yes, but who recorded that?
The whole Jewish nation.
Who recorded that the whole Jewish nation?
In writing,
Yes.
it was recorded by Moshe. Go on.
So do we have to take one man's word?
No.
Okay.
No. Your question will be answered as we go along.
Okay.
The question is valid, and we're going to answer it.
Hassan,
Yes?
I'm very naive of me, but I can't quite get my head around how 6 million people can be in one place observing the same thing. How you said that everybody was there and it could have been 6 million.
No, I said 3 or 4 million.
Was it? Sorry.
Even 3 or 4 million.
Yeah.
So in a big open desert, there were millions of people who came together, and the voice came from the top of a mountain right high up above them. So the question, what happens if someone claims the story was made up? That's your question. Okay? Okay, so the Torah says that we were all there. Well, maybe it's been invented. How do we know it's true? So now we have to start thinking. We have to start thinking now. How do we know it's true? First of all, what's a better claim? Which of these three is a better claim? God spoke to one person alone? God spoke to 2, 3 people together? Or God spoke to a whole nation, 100% all together? What's a better claim? The whole nation. The whole nation claim is the best claim. If that's the best claim, how come nobody else made it? Why did Buddhism not say that Buddha had his revelation in the company of 1 million or 2 million or 3 million Hindus? Who would know the difference? But he didn't say it. Why did Jesus or the Gospels not say that millions of people, and identify them, shared a prophecy with Jesus? Why didn't they say so? It's a much better claim. Why didn't Muhammad say? The Quran does not claim. Why can't he? Could have. Here we are in England. He was in Arabia, in Mecca. He could have said, 1 million, 2 million people shared with me, and today we wouldn't know the difference. How come? Why did he not claim that? It's a much better claim. So why do people rely, I had a vision? Tell me, 10 of us, 100 of us, 1,000 of us, bring the others. Show it. Nobody's made such a claim. Because it's impossible. You cannot sell such a falsehood because it'll be challenged. Bring the witnesses. Where are they? How come we never heard about it? Imagine the Pope were to say, oh yeah, God spoke to all the Italians all together at one point. Okay, when was it? Ask the Italians. Does any Italian know that God spoke to them at any stage? How can you sell such a story? Now we have to start thinking about this. How can you sell such a story? If it's not true, how can you sell it? The Torah said it's going to be impossible. It will never happen in history that anybody will claim that God spoke to a whole nation.
But Islam doesn't say that our story isn't true.
Pardon?
Islam doesn't say that our story isn't true.
No. Christianity says the Jewish story is true, yes. But Christianity says the Jewish story is true. Yes. But Jesus then came along and said that God told him from now on things are changing. Then Muhammad came along and said the Jewish story was true. Then, except for a few changes the Jews made in the book, and they put Ishmael for Yitzchak and Yitzchak for Ishmael, but basically the revelation that Moshe was a prophet, Musa, he was a prophet, and God did reveal himself, but that was till Jesus. Then Jesus was a prophet, and he said God told him to change things. And now I'm Muhammad, and I change it, and I'm the next one in line. But both Jesus and Muhammad agreed that the Torah revelation was true. So Christianity and Islam, the two biggest religions in the world, both agree that the Jewish story originally was true. The whole story was true. But then they had their own prophet who made a change.
So I might be getting my chronology wrong here. Okay, so if I am, forgive me.
Huh.
But if everybody was at Sinai and heard the revelation, how come there was then the golden calf?
That's a different shear in its own right. You're welcome to organize a shear on the golden calf.
Okay, but you see the dilemma.
It is a dilemma.
Okay.
Because it looks like idolatry, and it was not. They were not trying to replace God. They were trying to replace Moshe. If you want such a shir, please just speak to the rabbi, and if he agrees, we can somewhere after the series is finished, I'm happy to come along. If Rabbi wants, or you want to do it yourself, I'm happy to deal with the golden calf. It's going to take me at least an hour. Okay. So what I'm saying to you is that the Torah said from the very beginning, nobody is ever going to make such a claim. Why is the Torah so sure, well, God is speaking, that nobody will ever make such a claim? Because nobody will be stupid enough to make such a claim which can be so easily disproved. Bring along the people. So the next question is, maybe we were fooled. Right? Nobody else dared do that because they would be disproven. Maybe we were fooled. Let's take it further. Could the Sinai account be false? True that, thank you very much, Christianity says it's true, but we don't rely on them. Islam says it's true, we don't rely on them. We are claiming our own certainty. How do we know the account is true and not false? I told you you've got to start thinking tonight. So we need to start investigative thinking. We have to investigate this. You can't just listen to me, you've got to think. Let's try and reconstruct how a false story such as this could have been foisted on a nation. As a lie. Imagine it's a lie. When would it have been launched? Not at the claimed time when there was a Moses and a Jewish nation coming out of Egypt. Moshe could never have told Bnei Israel, you were slaves in Egypt. I took you out. God took you out. We went together to Sinai. You were all there together with me. And if it wasn't true, what would they say? Don't tell me what happened to me. I was there. It's not true. If I would say tomorrow that last night I was in Shrubberies, and when I was there, the lights went on, the light went off, and then the voice of God came and spoke to all of us, and I go around telling everybody, and it goes in the Jewish Telegraph, what are you all going to say? He's gone mad.
Can't believe the Jewish Telegraph.
That's why it's the only place that'll report it. Right. So at no point in history can somebody go up to a people and say, this is your history. Nobody can make a claim something happened in England on the 1st of February and report it in the press, and you lived in England the 1st of February, and you were there. It did not happen. So he tried, he didn't succeed. You can't sell a lie to the people who are supposed to have been there. So it would have to be claimed years and years and years after the supposed date, which is 3,300 years ago. It has to be much later to come along and tell an existing nation, your ancestors had this experience. You've forgotten, but your ancestors had this experience. Just by the way, it doesn't prove the point, but just by the way, one of the strategies to avoid that was that we were told from the beginning to get together every Seder night and tell the story again and again and again and again and again. Right? But that's not going to prove this point. Maybe this was foisted on us, and all we stupid Jews, we're supposed to be the cleverest, we have the biggest representation of Nobel Prize winners per capita than anybody else. So we'd have to be big fools, which doesn't seem to fit in with what we know about ourselves. Big fools to have been fooled by somebody who came along and said, once there was a Moses, once you were slaves in Egypt, once you came out of Egypt, once there was the splitting of the Red Sea, there were plagues in Egypt, you came to Sinai, God spoke to all of you, your grandparents, it's all your history. Nobody told me anything. It's a newcomer telling me something I've never heard about. I asked my cousins, I asked my friends, Did your grandfather, did anybody have such a tradition? Who sold it to us? When was it launched? Imagine it's a lie. Imagine it was sold to us. When was it sold to us, and who sold it to us? Look at the claim. Look what you have to sell to stupid people. Who convinced a nation that their ancestors had been slaves in Egypt? Well, nobody likes to be told your ancestors were slaves. Then you were freed with mighty miracles, which everybody saw. Then you were brought to Sinai, and you accepted a highly restrictive lifestyle. And the nation would say, we never heard of this. You're speaking to a nation. Even I just spoke to you here now, only a small group, and I say, your grandparents all came from Australia. Right? If I try to sell you a story, all your grandparents came from Australia. Immediately, one will say Poland, one will say Russia, one will say Holland. I can't sell you that story. And on top of it, they accepted a highly restrictive lifestyle. And the nation would say, we never heard of this. We will be postulating that some unknown Jewish leader, at some unknown point in time, has introduced the idea and told the nation, God spoke to all your ancestors, and they were all gullible enough to swallow it. They didn't challenge the leader. They didn't say, how come you're the only one who knows about it? Where do you get all the history from? We never heard of it. There's no historical record anywhere in any history of anybody, of the Jews, by the Jews, about the Jews, that there was such an innovation or such an innovator. Not even our biggest enemies have ever said, well, actually, yes, our biggest, 200 years ago, the German academic community, the so-called Bible critics, started saying the whole thing is an invention. They started saying it 200 years ago. We'll come to that later. But historical records, there's no historical record of an innovator or an innovation. Now, at this stage of the argument, it would help tremendously if you knew world history and Jewish history. But I'm not going to take it for granted that you do. I'll have to fill it in. But if you fill yourselves in on history, you'll find it easier to understand how we cannot find a place in history where somebody could have invented all this and sold it to a whole nation. Our history runs smoothly and continuously, with one book of Tanakh supporting the other. Joshua quotes Moses, Samuel quotes Moses, all the way through. King David quotes, right through, all the way through. And then the Gemara comes along and picks up, continuing where Tanakh left off. We have our history. We have a continuous, comprehensive chronology. We know the dates of everything from creation, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, King David, all the way through the first temple, second temple, destruction of the first temple, Babylon, back from Babylon. We have a comprehensive history all the way through. We have continuous historical records. We have thousands and thousands of copies of our early history all over the world. Wherever Jews are, from Russia to Patagonia, from Yemen to Australia, everywhere we have written records, hundreds of thousands of copies everywhere in the world. It's been the most recorded history ever, with the massive number of volumes again and again and again and again. So it's an impossibility. You cannot sell such a story if it's false, because nobody will buy it unless they're gullible fools. So if you want to think that our Jewish ancestors bought this, you're saying they were stupid. And I don't think many Jews would like to say that Jewish ancestors were stupid. Maybe they were, but nobody would like to say that. That's not the answer. So that's why no one has ever attempted to create such a lie. And the Torah says nobody will ever attempt to create a lie that God spoke to a whole nation, because no one will buy it. And we bought it. How come we bought it? It must be because it really happened, and we have an unbroken national memory about it. Nobody had any contradictory national memories.
about the order of the written.
The order of the written Torah.
Yeah.
So-
when it was first written down.
So Moshe wrote the 5 books of Moshe.
Yeah.
That was about 3,300 years ago. Then Joshua wrote most of his book immediately after Moshe passed away. And we conquered Canaan. And there's records of... In fact, Joshua's conquest of Canaan has left archaeological traces, where whoever has dug in Israel, including non-Jews who don't like us, have had to admit that never has any archaeological evidence contradicted a single word of the Bible. That's coming from a non-Jewish archaeologist who's not particularly interested in... So let's go back in time. When could this have been invented and sold to us? Our biggest enemies, Christianity and Islam, I told you before, they accept the story as true. So 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, the Torah is true, but now God said I should change it. And then Muhammad said the same thing. So 2,000 years ago, it was there already. The whole Tanakh was translated into Greek 300 years before that. It's called the Septuagint. A king of Egypt sent for Jewish sages and said, I want your Bible translated into Greek for my library. And it was needed also by the Jews living in Alexandria. They didn't know Hebrew, so it was translated into Greek. So now we have a 2,300-year-old translation of the Torah. So nobody could have sold it to us for the past 2,300 years. So for 2,300 years, we've had it. Now that was about 200 years after we claim we had sealed the Bible by declaring prophecy was finished. That's when the Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, the last prophet said, prophecy is finished. From now on, we can tell you in the name of God, no more prophets. And if anybody claims to be a prophet, right? He's a liar. Kill him. Get rid of him. So who started questioning it? There were Hellenized Jews. You know the story of Hanukkah. They didn't want to live by the Torah. They wanted to be like the Greeks. So already in those days, when Alexander the Great came to Israel 2,400 years ago or so, it was there already. Because there were Jews rebelling against it. So it was there already. And a short while later, the Sadducees, they wanted to disagree with it. It was there, they wanted to disagree with it. So 2,400 years ago, the whole Tanakh was there. So if it was foisted falsely, it would have been before that. So we already cut away 2,400 years out of history when it might have happened, if it did happen. Alexander the Great visiting Israel, that was within 100 or so years from the last books of Tanakh. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Ezra, Nehemiah, these books are written within 100 years of Alexander arriving. So they were recent histories. And all these books refer back to earlier books of Tanakh, and Chronicles links everything. He goes right through the names and the families of the Jewish families, of those who came from Babylon to Israel, tracing them back all the way to Genesis. So there is a continuous record, historical record, all the way through, and we are very punctilious about guarding our records. What happens if the Baal Korah, the reader in Shul, makes a mistake when he's reading from the Torah? What happens? Everybody? Everybody shouts. Yeah? And what happens? Oh, there's something wrong with the Sefer Torah. Have you ever been in Shul when somebody finds something wrong with the Sefer Torah? What happens? Roll it up, put it back in the ark, put a strap around it, take another one out. We do not tolerate one mistake in the Torah. So we have highly guarded records. We've got archaeological support as well. Just one example. Joshua's altar. So God told Moshe to tell Joshua to build an altar on Mount Ebal. That's above Nablus. It was unearthed in 1980 and dated. This is the oldest existing archaeological artifact which is mentioned in the books of Moses. Moses said to Joshua, build an altar. And then the book of Joshua says they built an altar. It's there. Go and look at it. It's been slightly reconstructed because it's been buried for 3,000 years. It was uncovered in the 1980s. It's there, you can go and see it. You need permission from the army because it's in Nablus. You've got to have you've got to make sure it's safe when you go. But it's there. So the further back in time you go, the more difficult it is to sell such a false story to people who were nearer to the claimed events. So if I tell you a false story, something happened yesterday here, you know straight away it's not true. If I tell you it was 50 years ago, there'll be people here who are older than I am, or more or less the same age, and they'll say, no, that did not happen 50 years ago. In 1970, that did not happen in England. I've read the news since then, and I've been following everything. Somebody will say it's not true. So the nearer you are to the false story, the more difficult it is to sell it. And we've already cut away 2,400 years in non-Jewish history, and we have our records for the previous 1,000 years, all the way back to when it happens. And that history runs smoothly, book after book after book after book. And don't underestimate the testimony of, what does that say? I'm a Cohen. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was Aaron, the brother of Moshe. And we all believe them. There's all these little things, it's not the main point, but all these little things along the way which keep on telling us, like the Pesach Seder, the Kohanim, these these practices are saying something to us all the time. So who started questioning it? It only started 200 years ago. 19th century Germany, academic scholars started tearing the Bible to pieces in the wake of general disrespect of religion, which came from the French philosophers. And Chief Rabbi Hertz pronounced it higher anti-Semitism, not higher criticism. And a couple of generations later, their theories were rejected by the academic community. We never believed them. The academic community, not religious people, non-Jews, they said, yeah, it was a nice try, but it's wrong. So that's when the questioning started. Till then, nobody questioned it. It so happens that on a ridiculous level, the fact that Christianity said it's true and Islam said it's true, and most of us lived either in Christian countries or Muslim countries, we never had any doubts, because we had no doubts, and the Christians believe it's true, and the Muslims believe it's true, so why should we have a doubt? It's only with the German anti-Semitic scholars started questioning that the question arose, maybe the whole story was concocted. And if you try and trace, when was it concocted? Where was it concocted? Where is the record of somebody introducing this false idea into the Jewish nation? But unfortunately, many unlearned Jews started believing the German academics. And let's face it, the Torah from God is a highly uncomfortable book. It means I can't do what I want. There's no record in history of any personality who came to the Jews at any point in history and introduced the story. No record of a name, no record of a time, no record of a place. In no histories of any nation, anywhere, not the Greeks, not the Romans, no one has ever found a claim that we were sold a false story. It's to our credit that we've kept it alive. We kept it alive. And little things like the Pesach Seder and the Baruch of the Kohanim and all that, all these things are all part of a whole supporting culture which goes along with it. But the bottom line is, it is not a story you can sell to a nation. And the Torah says it cannot be sold.
But is the point not that naysayers would say it's an allegory? It's not a fact, it's an allegory. It's representative of. So only some people were there, and then they told their families. So they were there, but they weren't really there. That's what it really means, that not everybody was there in person, not everybody heard it, but it was passed down to some people and they passed it down to their families. So it's that's what I hear people say about the whole Torah, that it's an allegory, it's not factual.
And that's what we're trying to disprove. Try and reconstruct the selling of such a story to a nation. You say to them, you were all there in person and it really happened, and they'll say, it's not true, it was an allegory. When did that happen? If you tell people this is what happened to you, they'll say it didn't happen to me. If it was an allegory and you say this happened, they say no, it didn't happen. It's a convenient way of getting rid of responsibilities.
If this mass revelation is such a great method,
It's such a great
method for getting your
message across.
Why did God give it up and start giving messages to individual prophets?
Very simple. Because we all turned round to Moses after the first couple of commandments and said, we can't cope with this. It's too overwhelming. Please go and tell God that we'd rather he tells you and you tell us. So we heard the first commandment, we heard the first commandment, the second one, and then we just couldn't cope. We were overwhelmed to the extent that the oral law says that we died and had to be brought back to life. So then God said, okay, from now on, for the next 8 commandments, I'll tell Moshe. So we could hear a voice which we could not discern, but we knew God's voice saying, Moshe, tell them. We couldn't quite work it out, and then Moshe repeated it for the next 8 commandments. And then during the rest of the time in the desert, we trusted. See, once we knew that Moshe was a prophet, because we shared prophecy with him, now we knew we could trust him. So from then on, for 40 years we trusted him, on top of which he wasn't the only prophet. During those 40 years there were many, many other prophets. And throughout the first 1,000 years of Jewish history, there was a total of 1,200,000 men and women who communicated with God. But only those who had a message for future generations were put in writing. The others just had messages, local messages for themselves or for whoever consulted them. So we've been a nation of prophets for 1,000 years. At the end of the 1,000, more or less, give it a year or two, at the end of the 1,000 years, the last prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, said, this is it. There'll never be any more prophets till Mashiach comes. And just by the way, that's one reason why we said no to Jesus, because it's just impossible. He was 500 years later. So the basis is that the Torah itself says that such a story cannot be concocted and sold to people. People will not buy it. And so people want to say, well, it's not really meant to be real. It was an allegory. So was there a Moses? Was there not a Moses? Was there Egypt? Was there not an Egypt? Was there an Exodus? Was there not an Exodus? Were the people dreaming? So who sold a dream to the Jews later, and then the Jews later said it happened? For thousands of years, our ancestors have been saying, it happened, it happened, it happened, it happened. Now, all of a sudden, somebody doesn't like it and says, I don't like it, it's an allegory. Saying that has got much less basis than saying it happened. It's the most recorded event in history in terms of written records. If somebody finds a statue and it says on it, this is Aristotle, that's proof. If you have 10,000, 50,000 books with the same story, there's more evidence to Moshe than anybody else. As some non-Jewish scholar once said, if there wasn't a Moses, we'd have to invent one because somebody had to be behind all this. So we've been passing down for thousands of years this story as a real story, not as an allegory. And nobody else has claimed such a story. Why not? Because it can't be claimed. Why can it not be claimed? Because you cannot fool a nation. You cannot tell people this happened to your ancestors. We never heard of it. Who told them? When was it told? We can't find a place in history for it to happen. The Tanakh was sealed 500 years ago. Okay? So till then, it could not have been, it was there already, so it could not have been sold to them till then. Before that, we have every single book recording, the kings, the dates, all the dynasties of the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, the history with Egypt, the history with Babylon. There is actual archaeological evidence of a king of Israel bowing down to a king of Assyria. It's there. Yahoo bowing to the king Sanherib. Archaeology has never disproved a single point in the Bible. If anything, it's supported it, like I just showed you, the altar of Yehoshua. So where did it go? If it was a lie, who made it up? Who sold it to us? How could we believe it? Are we fools? Who could have done it? And the Torah says nobody will ever make such a claim. It's not possible. You can't fool people like this. So it's our credit. We've kept it alive and viable for over 3,300 years. So the fact that we are here today speaking about it, God said, you are my witnesses. Each one of us is a testimony to a father and a mother, even if we don't know who they are. And each one of our parents is a testimony to their father and their mother. So we are all a testimony to earlier generations. And right through history, we've all been telling this story, teaching our children the Bible, having Pesach Seder, having the Kohanim, all those little bits and pieces which have been going through all the time. Find me a time in history when these things were not there. They've always been there. There's never been a break in the transmission of the history of the Jewish nation. We've had it all the way through. So the fact that we are here today to tell the story, that itself is a testimony that something must have happened. Either we all descend from fools, or the story is true. And if we do descend from fools, find me in history that point in history where a whole nation was foolish enough to believe such a story and accept such a restrictive lifestyle. Don't eat pork, don't do this, keep Shabbos, don't work on Shabbos, you can't play golf on Shabbos. Who would have bought such a story if it's false? If God told me to keep Shabbos, I'll keep Shabbos. If a stranger tells me, why should I listen to him? It interferes in my lifestyle. So the fact we have it is an indication that it must have happened. And the fact that nobody else makes a claim or will ever make the claim. Now, either you're convinced or you're not convinced. That's up to you to decide. Can anybody pick any holes in the picture? Yes?
They made up the story at Sinai.
Pardon?
They made up the story at Sinai.
Make up the story at Sinai. How do you get millions of people saying we were millions of people at Sinai and we all agreed to make up a story that God spoke to us?
Moses is a very powerful character. He says, right.
Moses was a stutterer. He couldn't even talk in public.
That's the good way to say this.
Pardon?
Actually, it's as powerful as a very powerful leader.
I can't hear you.
Say he wasn't a stutterer, okay? Say
But he was.
Say he's a very powerful orator, and he said, right, we're now going to create this story.
And millions of people believed him.
Millions of people believe Hitler, so it's possible.
You think?
They all followed what he said.
Huh?
Two Jews agree on anything.
Somebody would have said, I was there, and it happened. Or it didn't happen, if you made it up, then somebody would say, or the next generation, then somebody would say, I don't know what talking about that.
You can't tell people this happened to you. If I say to you, this morning you had breakfast with me in my house. Can I tell you that?
No, it's mass hysteria.
Pardon?
I mean, there is such a thing as mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria
Yeah.
for millions of people. Yeah, go on. Find me a comparable story of the 10 plagues, of the Exodus from Egypt, at Har Sinai, of Revelation, of God speaking, of making a powerful impact on us, which has kept us going for 3,300 years. Find me a similar example of mass hysteria.
And it was passed down orally for
No, Moshe wrote his book straight away.
Yeah, but
passed on orally?
That's the next subject. How do we know that the oral tradition is accurate? That's next week's subject. What about Chinese whispers? Maybe it's been distorted. Okay, we'll take that separately. The oral law. Now I'm speaking about what the Torah writes, the revelation of the Torah. The Torah itself says nobody will ever make such a claim. And nobody has ever made such a claim. Because you can't make such a claim. Because you can't sell such a story to a nation. You might sell it to one fool, to two fools. You can't sell it to a nation.
Unless it's the nation doing something.
Pardon?
Unless it's the nation doing something.
Why should the nation... how many people can plot? How many people can plot together and make a plot together, and nobody's going to leak it to the press? Look, poor old Boris Johnson. How many people were involved in that plot?
What press in those days? There wasn't the press in those days. So
Pardon?
There wasn't the press, so it would be orally, and then, like you say, how do you sell it to a nation? Well, look at all the dictators that sold their.
How long have they lasted?
Well, some of them, have lasted longer than others.
How long have the stories of Stalin or Hitler? How long have the stories lasted? And even if they sold something, political system, they didn't create an ongoing, continuous nation reproducing and carrying on, teaching the next generation, next generation, next generation. And it was powerful enough to create what I called last week the two bastard sister religions.
You could argue then that Christianity was just a continuation of modernization of that system.
That's what they said. That is what Jesus said. We're going to live, it has to be modern now, keep up with the times. We can't have such a restrictive lifestyle anymore, we'll make it easier. God spoke to me and told me to change it. And we say to him, hey, if God wants to change it, told us, not you. Pardon?
And Hashem allowed it to catch on.
Yeah, the Rambam says, how come Hashem allowed Christianity and Islam to catch on? He said God's wisdom is very deep, and God wanted to prepare the world for the idea of Messiah, so he allowed these two to succeed and convince people that, well, Christianity is totally illogical because it's based on the testimony of one person. So it's faith, it's not logic.
So why do all these clever...
Why do all these?
These clever higher Christians believe then if it's not credible?
Okay, so that's a different point now. God wants to give people free will. In order to give free will, there has to be two sides to the story. So for every good side, there is a parallel bad side. Otherwise, you don't have free will. So if there is a true Torah, there has to be idolatry for people to have free will. If there's a true religion, there has to be a false one for people to have free will. And the false one has to have enough power. It's got to have power, otherwise it's not free will. So there's hundreds and hundreds of religions in the world, hundreds of religions. People want a religion. They want a religion, and they have a power. But they have a power because unless they have a power, there's no free will left.
What's interesting, though, is when I talk to people who have studied Christianity, they tell me that if you actually go back to what he's meant to have said, what Jesus is meant to have said, he never says a lot of the things that are attributed to him. It's actually his followers, like you said, 30, 40, 50 years after he's died, that are meant to have said some of these things, and that have then become part of his religion. So actually, there is a view that Jesus did keep kosher.
Well,
that he did keep Shabbos, and he did keep Seder, and he did keep a lot of stuff.
But he said, God spoke to me, and who believed him? Nobody believed him. They complained the Jews had no faith. Of course they had no faith. We knew he was wrong. So this is the concept of zeh leumat zeh. The negative sides have to have a power, otherwise there's no free will. Nobody has got as watertight a case as we have. Because everybody else is based on single people revelations. Right through till the past century, there's been people coming up and having revelations and starting new religions.
Christian scientists, Mormons,
Yeah.
all down to one person.
No, Mormons about 200 years ago.
I'm saying it's all down to...
Actually, no, there was two.
Okay.
Two people can also make a plot together. More than two, it's very difficult to make a plot together. You can't create a plot. The larger the group, the more difficult it is to keep a secret.
Why did there need to be free will?
Why?
Why did there need to be free will?
Why? So why did God
God
create?
want everybody just to follow one religion?
No. God wants humans to have free will, for humans to choose to develop themselves and make something out of themselves and not be robots. He could have created millions of wonderful tzaddikim. They'd be nobodies because they've done nothing. He wants to give us a chance to be a somebody, to make ourselves into something. So the truth is it's a separate shiur. Why did God create humans? If you want a shiur on that, we can have one. It's a valid question, and we have the answers. Yeah?
So Hashem allowed Christianity and Buddhism and Muslim to take traction. Why didn't he then at the start, like Sodom and Gomorrah, then just destroy all that believed in it and just say, right, this is the
No.
religion, no others are allowed?
At certain points in history, God destroyed cultures which were a threat to the future of humanity. And then up to a certain point. And then he just let people carry on. So this happened with the flood, it happened with Sodom and Gomorrah, it happened with the Tower of Babel without destroying them, just scattering them, and then go your own way, human beings, see what you can do.
So does that mean that he's given up on us?
No, he's not given up on us. He's constantly watching and following and tracking and tracing, as I say today. And he is guiding history to a final point when there will be a Mashiach, a revelation, an ingathering of Jews into Israel. Humans will start accepting God via, that's what Mashiach means. He's heading, it's going to happen. He's told us there's a time limit, by the year 6000 it has to happen.
But how do you know that?
Because we have a tradition, which we'll discuss next week about the oral law, that the world is here for 6,000 years, and then comes a big Shabbos. We have 6 days of the week and weekly Shabbos. We're going to have 6,000 years of work, and then comes Shabbos. And that's an ancient Jewish tradition going all the way back to... it's recorded at least 1,800 years ago in writing.
Israel is not big enough to accept everybody.
Israel held many more people in ancient times than we realize. And besides, we are going to expand. Invest in a state... in a state on the banks of the Euphrates and other such places, you can make a profit on it.
I don't think there'll be such a concept as ownership, though, in those days.
Yes?
You mentioned the latter prophet.
Yes. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi.
Right. And they actually were adamant that there would be no more Nebuchadnezzar until the time of Mashiach. Why were they so sure, and what was the...
Right, because until then we had a Bet HaMikdash with a powerful revelation of God. That powerful presence in the Bet HaMikdash, Shekhinah, acted in a sense like an antenna to bring God's presence into the world and make it accessible in power to the prophets. Once the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, even though we built a second one, the second one did not have that level of revelation, and therefore that power wasn't there. Also, because till then idolatry had been a big temptation for humans. And idolatry was the cause of the destruction of the first temple, because so many Hebrews, unfortunately, were being seduced by idolatry. So the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the gathering of sages which Ezra brought from Babylon and established a supreme Bet Din in Israel, they prayed, they petitioned, they begged God, and they said to God, you gave us temptation for idolatry so we can grow as a result of overcoming it, but it failed. So please God, it would be a wonderful reward if we were to succeed, but we didn't. So we'd rather give up on the reward and give up on the temptation and on the damage. And God listened to them, and from then on, idolatry lost its allure. Today we're not interested in idolatry. But once that allure went away, that temptation went away, then our overcoming of it, which made us so great, wasn't there anymore. So it all went hand in hand. Those three prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, were part of the Knesset Gedolah. They were in that gathering. They were amongst the ones who prayed to God to remove the allure of idolatry.
So, if we're the chosen people, why does God allow so much anti-Semitism?
To remind you you're the chosen people. To remind you you're the chosen people. You didn't buy that one, did you? Again, we have an answer for it. Anti-Semitism goes back to Esav and Yaakov. Esav hated Yaakov. And since then, there's been a hatred for us. In fact, even before that, Ishmael as well. The two... Pardon?
Why does God allow it?
Because we can only grow if we are challenged.
Well, it's a convenient answer.
I can prove it. I can take you through historically and show you. Why should we be looking for convenient answers? Why should we fool ourselves? Are Jews stupid? Pardon? Are all Jews stupid? As a nation, are we stupid? I don't think so. We've had some of the finest brains in history, ever. Much more percentage than any other nation. We have the answers. I'm happy to sit with you time and again and go through all these questions. Pardon?
When the rabbis are discussing the leaving of the leave on Pesach, when they're discussing leaving Eretz, Egypt,
right.
and they use allegorical terms in their talk. I mean, they say things like the mountain skips.
Yes. That's King David's poetry. Yes, there is allegory, there is poetry in Tanakh. Yes, and the prophets all spoke in riddles and allegories. Yes. There's a difference between a prophecy which is in allegories or a narrative which is telling an incident which happened. Moshe Rabbeinu did not speak in allegories. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke black and white, straightforward. The 5 books of the Torah are not allegorical. The other prophets spoke in allegories. Moshe did not. And God himself said to Aaron and Miriam, Moshe is not like other prophets. Moshe, he gets information straight, not like the others who get it allegorically. So Jacob was given a prophecy. He saw a ladder from heaven to earth and angels going up and down. It was a message. What does it mean? I don't know, but it was a message. So he saw it allegorically. But Moshe Rabbeinu did not see things allegorically. He got straight talk from God. God said himself in the Torah, I speak to Moshe pale, mouth to mouth, face to face.
I'd like to thank Rabbi Hassan for a wonderful talk. Next week we will be in the Hilton Suite. We would have been in the Hilton Suite tonight, but because of the because of the wedding that they had there tonight, so we have to set up over here. I think it's not ideal as a space, but I hope next week we'll have a better space. Next week the discussion is going to be Chinese whispers. You know, did the rabbis, or is our tradition accurate? Even if you buy the story that we've said tonight, that there is a mass revelation, has that then been passed down accurately? And there's so many extra bits and pieces that go with it. It's not only the revelation, but all the mitzvahs and everything. So join us next week at the same time.